Julie Cohen, and thank you for joining me and my guest, who I'll be revealing shortly, for Work Life Leader Live Leadership Chat. We're going to be talking about today, our topic for today is internal versus external coaching, what HR and leaders need to know. So, but before we dive into the topic and I introduce my wonderful guest, I want to remind you what Work Life Leader Live is. I have the honor of having this ability to talk to folks live via LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And I'm talking about with really interesting people, things that are related to work, leadership, work-life balance, the integration between work and our non-work time. And we're using this platform in a variety of ways. So these leadership chats where I'll be having conversations with subject matter experts. We're going to be having the Work Life Leader Live book group, which will start shortly. And our topic for that, our first book is going to be No Rules Rules, Netflix and the Culture of Reinvention. And also Work Life Leader Live coaching. So these are some of the different ways I'm going to be coming to you and continue coming to you, hopefully providing value for our time together. So with that, I want to introduce our guest and my friend, Bill Hyman. Hi, Bill.
Good afternoon, Julie. Good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah. So first off, before I even give the formal introduction of Bill Hyman, if you're watching now and you're watching live, and by now I mean Wednesday afternoon, is it October 14th? It's 4 p.m. Eastern. Please introduce yourself in the comments, say hello, put hashtag live so we know you're here live. And we're hoping our conversation is going to be interactive. We'll be responding to your questions and we'll be looking for your comments. So let me introduce Bill. Bill is a seasoned human resources executive and a leadership coach who's worked in multiple industries, including the Fortune 500, mid-sized private and nonprofit organizations. His last role was as a chief human resources officer for CDI, which is a leading national professional services firm. And I'm also honored that Bill has time to be an executive coach for Work Life Leader amongst his other professional and client responsibilities. And Bill has the honor of being the first Work Life Leader Live guest who's back for a second time. So welcome back, Bill.
Thank you, Julie. I'm excited to be back and chat with you again, especially about coaching or love.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So this is a favorite topic of both mine and Bill's. So a lot of information, the concept of executive coaching and the competency, as well as kind of the profession of what is executive coaching and how it serves leaders. There's a lot of people who talk about that, and as Bill and I do. And in deciding what we wanted to talk about today, Bill and I started saying, well, what do people often ask us about? And so we're actually going to be going deeper in looking at executive coaching, but a nuance around executive coaching is the concept of internal versus external coaching. And both Bill and I have career roots in both of these areas, internal and external coaching. So we're going to be talking about the pros and cons of this. And this conversation is for organizations, it's for HR professionals and leaders, but it's also for those of you who are leaders who are looking for coaching. And the more able you are to understand the differences, you can advocate for more of what you want and need, and also understand why your organization may be providing what they are providing. So with that, Bill, why don't you explain what internal coaching is, just so we get some definitions out of the way?
Sure. So let me share my own experience. I was really fortunate that I've been coaching for 20 years, both as an internal coach and as an external coach. But most of my coaching experience was as an internal coach. So what that means is that for about 18 years, I was an internal coach at a Fortune 50 company, Lockheed Martin. And Lockheed made a commitment that they wanted to train a small group of HR professionals to really coach as part of their jobs. It was not a separate job per se. Lockheed really wanted to create a coaching mindset of the HR team. So I was one of initially of about 6 or 7 HR professionals that they invest in the training. We went through about 50, 60 hours of coach training, and then we were assigned the high potential leaders within Lockheed to coach them in addition to our other responsibilities as HR professionals.
Great. And I'll share my background is similar, not as many years in the internal role as you've had. My coaching career also started as an internal coach, very, very similar. Mine was in the mid-late 90s, working for, at the time, Ernst & Young, their management consulting group. We were losing our best and brightest talent to the first .com era, Silicon Valley salaries that we couldn't match. And I was on a design team looking at how to retain and recruit talent during this time. And we developed an internal coaching program to address and support our best leaders, our high potential talent. And similarly, that was part of my job, not my whole job. And then decided to leave the organization in 2000. So I'm coming up to 20 years, which gives us a segue of what is external coaching. And so I'll start on that, and then you can kind of fill in the blanks that I missed. So internal coaching, as Bill and I have said, the coaches are from the organization. They are employed by the organization, and they serve some component of leaders' talent within the organization. External coaches are consultants that are hired for specific engagements, brought in from the outside, and will coach, individuals, leaders, teams specific to that organization. But that coach is not an employee of that organization. So it's basically an external consultant, and that's why we call them an external coach. So what did I miss? And did I miss anything else about external coaches?
No, I think you pretty much nailed it. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that when you're an internal coach, you have the badge, literally and figuratively, of the company that you're working for, and you're coaching typically multiple leaders within that one organization as an internal coach versus external, where, again, the badge is not with that company. You're not an employee of the company. And typically you're working with many different companies and working with many different leaders in different industries.
Yeah, great. So that's our starting point. It's funny, we were going to start by introducing ourselves and talking about our histories. So why we're credible to be talking about both of these, because we've both been both internal and external coaches, but we kind of just shared that. So we don't have to do that question, Bill. And again, my external coaching has now been, next month it'll be 20 years that I've been on my own. So the predominant part of my career now has been external coaching, and I know your predominant part of your coaching career was internal, and now you've been external for some time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you've made the transition a little more recently, so that will have a little different insight. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. So before we start going deeper, I wanted to just pause and reintroduce our topic. And if you're watching live on Wednesday, October 14th, around 4 something Eastern, please let us know you're here live. Say hello in the comments. We'll see those. And if you have any questions as we get started, we'll be coming to the comments and integrating your questions, your thoughts. If you're an internal coach or an external coach who's watching this, we'd love to hear about your experience, your thoughts as we start looking at the pros and cons and the nuances. And I see we have a Mr. David Hyman joining us. Hello, David Hyman. Nice to have you here. And we'll keep going. So let's start, Bill. Internal coaching. Let's look at it. Pros and cons. I'll start with kind of the concept of pros. You mentioned the term badge. So, that's one of the pros of internal coaching, which sometimes can be seen as a con, is that person works for your organization and understands the culture, understands how things operate, and understands the lingo, the acronyms, who the players are. So let's talk about you can go deeper on that, but other pros. What are the pros of working with internal coaches? and the internal coaching concept.
Yeah, so Julie, if I could just take one step back though. So part of, I mean, my glib response is coaching, regardless if you're an internal coach or an external coach. And by that, I mean, there are some core, certainly as you and I know, there's some core principles that any coach needs to really be mindful of, as an internal and external coach. But one of the things I think is important that you and I emphasize is that coaching is a profession, and that as any profession, you need to have training, you need to be skilled in it, and you need to have some experience in it. So as an internal coach, I think you hit on, a number of the pros as an internal coach. But like you mentioned, knowing the culture and especially the people and the dynamics within the organization can be particularly helpful. Not a requirement by any means, but in terms of providing context for the coach, that's pretty automatic for the most part because they do work for the organization, and they do understand a lot of the contextual. You had said the lingo of that particular industry and organization.
Yeah. So you brought up a very important point. So coaching as both a profession and a competency, whether you're an internal coach or an external coach, that the person who is being coached, some people use the word coachee, I don't, I use leader or person being coached. And that's a culture thing too. Every organization has their own lingo for that. They're going to be getting that same type of support if the people who are providing the coaching, whether it's internal or external, are finding coaches and training coaches to that same standard. So, and before we keep going, you reminded me there's another point that I think is really important to bring up here. And this is kind of my passion and kind of has been my life's work for the last 20 some years, is I believe coaching, whether internal or external, whether you call it executive coaching or leadership coaching or career coaching, coaching is the most powerful professional and personal development tool. So that as a foundation to me means everyone, who has the benefit of working with a coach, to take it and have that coaching relationship support you to operate at your best, professionally and personally. So that's just another aside to coaching. So back to internal coaching and other pros. So besides kind of that culture piece, there's some logistical things that I think are beneficial about an internal coach. One is often, not always, and I'd be curious how it worked, when you were in your role, there's a greater ease of access at times from both the initial engagement, like raising your hand, hey, I want to coach, to even like access of, getting more coaching sessions and just the logistics of meeting in the old days face to face, but now, during our pandemic, everyone is coaching virtually. And with that, there might, we can get to this later, there could be some cost benefits, but not always, honestly. So thoughts on that, other pros I'm missing, other pros we're missing?
I mean, I guess implicit, one other pro, and I think it's implicit, Julian, what we're talking about is, look, we know coaching is relationship profession, and often, not always, but often when you're coaching internal to an organization, there's depending upon the leader that you're coaching, especially if you have a prior relationship with that person, there's a much quicker time span in terms of building that relationship. So that can also be, especially to hopefully the coach has a really good internal reputation. So that can also be an added benefit, that there's not much time spent on the initial relationship building. It can only be enhanced and quicker time in building a really deep, trusting coaching relationship.
Right. And it's interesting. What it's funny. Bill and I chatted briefly about what we were going to be talking about, or the questions we were going to be discussing. And I'm realizing, Bill, kind of asking pros and cons, and then pros and cons of internal versus, some of it is opposite, some of the benefits. And so as we talk, this might be a more integrated conversation, as opposed to talk about internal and external.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a good time to remind people, if you're watching on any platform, you can put questions in the comments. We love to get questions. And we're talking about internal versus external coaching, but if you have any questions about executive coaching, in your organization or outside your organization, we welcome those questions. So just put them in the chat box. And if you're watching live and putting the questions live, you can do #live so we know you're there. I see we have a couple more guests. Arya Sherman, nice to have you watching. He says hello. Janine Pratt and Leah Hyman. So we have some of the Hyman fan club here, Bill.
I think they're here watching you, Julie.
Oh, you do? Okay, good. Well, hi. All right. So, so when I worked for Ernst & Young as an internal coach, it was interesting. One of the pros worked for a part of a demographic, but didn't work for another demographic, which I think is really important. The comfort of having someone internal as your coach worked very well with the more junior leaders. Mm-hmm. So what we found is the most senior leaders in our organization were more hesitant to work with an internal coach and often requested someone who wasn't related to the organization. Mm-hmm. And so I think that ties into this line I was talking about. The pros and cons are kind of similar, is one of the foundational, and I see Janine Pratt just said, speak to confidentiality of internal versus external coaching. Janine, this is exactly where I'm going. So thank you for that comment. I think some of the senior executives that we worked with in the internal coaching world were a little hesitant to be talking with coaches, even though confidentiality is critical and always central to a coaching relationship. That the idea that the person worked for the organization, there was more hesitancy or discomfort or lack of engagement. The coaching program that I was involved with was all voluntary. People could raise their hand and then utilize the coach. We found we got very few senior executives in our organization wanting to use the internal coaches. So thoughts on that issue of comfort using internal coaches versus external coaches. Again, I like to believe, responding to Janine's question, that confidentiality needs to be set up front in any coaching engagement. Any credentialed, competent, highly trained coach, that is literally the first piece of building a coaching relationship. And yet, if there are perceptions that confidentiality isn't, complete, it can impact. So thoughts?
Yeah, let me build on that. So, for people who are watching this, they're going to say, of course, that's incredibly obvious. Things that you talk about, you set the expectations going to be confidential. But let me tell you where it can be particularly challenging when you're an internal coach. And maybe this is not confidential, but it's more in terms of implicit bias. So as I've mentioned before, it's common, not always, but it's common when you're an internal coach, that's not your only job. So when I was an internal coach, I had multiple jobs along the way while I was still an internal coach. So one of the jobs I had was leading talent management for a particular business area So where it becomes difficult from a confidentiality perspective is, so one hat you're wearing within the organization is you're coaching a high potential leader. But then another role you're playing is now you're leading the talent management effort. You're in a meeting where you're talking about this individual. So you know more about this person than other people when we're assessing the talent. But going back to confidentiality, absolutely, you can't share anything that you've spoken about in that coaching relationship. But you also have to check yourself as an internal coach that you're not being biased, either positive or negative, when you're in different settings when this person's being discussed.
Yeah. So if I may be so bold, Bill, and I know you don't work in that organization anymore, mm-hmm. I would challenge that is a conflict of interest, and that's not, from an organizational standpoint, if I am developing an internal coaching program, I would advise, if I was advising someone to do that, I would say you do not want to have your internal coaches have any dual roles, because there would be some implied concern of conflict of interest. And so that to me is exactly why there's some people who might be hesitant to use an internal coach, because where's that line? And I know you would be very cognizant, and your integrity would not allow, that line to be crossed. But it's what you allow and what perceptions may happen. Your perceptions are reality in that case. So to me, that's a really tricky role to be in.
It is, and I would say that's one of the most challenging parts of being an internal coach, because any strategic HR professional should always be looking at talent, assessing talent, and developing talent. So no matter what job you're in, if you're an internal coach and you also work in HR, which is 99.9% of the case, you're always going to be put in the position where you're assessing talent. And that becomes even much more complicated when you're coaching high potential talent within the organization. So that's one of the cons. Frankly, that's one of the cons, I would say, of being an internal coach.
And what I'm seeing, and I'd be curious if you're seeing it, and then we have questions that we have to get to from our viewers. What I'm seeing more and more, which is exciting on the internal coaching side, is that organizations are actually hiring people that are 100% coaches, that they're coaching 100%. So, when I was a coach in the 90s, I coached about 40 to 50% of the time. And then I also had HR responsibility. So I was in that dual role. Coaching was such a new profession back then. Again, I got into, this was in the 97, 98, 99. People didn't know what coaches, when I told people I was a coach, they'd be like, what sport? And, I always had to explain, what I was doing, because it was so new. And so there wasn't that kind of awareness of that as it is now. Now organizations have, coach teams, coach benches. You and I have friends and colleagues that we know are, work for an organization, and they're having 30, 40 coaching sessions a week with, a team of, with leaders. So that's to me, the way that you can protect the coaching relationship and not let it kind of bleed into those other areas. So we have some really great questions. Arye asks, how difficult was it to make the transition from internal to external coaching? So Bill, why don't you start that, because you've done that much more recently.
Yeah. So great question, Arye, and Janine's question was also very good about confidentiality. So as I've mentioned before, internal coach for 18 years, external coach now 2+ years. So I go back to what I said before. Coaching is a profession, and there's certain core principles that one follows regardless if you're an external or internal coach. So from my own personal experience, I thought the transition perhaps would be more challenging than it is. I have found that the coaching process is very similar. The issues you talk about with with the leaders is very similar, regardless if you're a first-time leader, emerging leader, leader in a new role, or at the C level. So for the most part, it's a general statement, Arye. My experience has been that it's more similar than it is different, being a external coach versus an internal coach.
Yeah, so thank you, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
I think from a coaching standpoint, when we actually kind of use our craft, our skills, our, the actual coaching, yeah, as we started the discussion, coaching is coaching. And as a coach, you show up and are there with your client in a very specific way, regardless of regardless of who is paying the bill, whether you're getting it as salary or whether you're getting it as a consulting fee, right? I do think what's interesting is going, when you're an internal coach, you have, now if we talk just from the standpoint of, what if I'm an internal coach and I want to become an external coach, or vice versa? I think there are some unique challenges. As an internal coach, you get paid a salary and your clients show up, and you have a job every day. Becoming an external coach, you become an entrepreneur, or you become usually a consultant to a coaching company that might be more than one person, and they provide you business. So I do think kind of making that switch from internal to external coaching, the skills are the same. You have to kind of find your business. So that there's like that entrepreneurial piece that comes with that transition, that some people may be very attracted to, and some people may shy away. What I find often now is there's people who are external coaches who want to go internal. And I think one of the challenges for that is there's fewer of those positions available. And so it's hard to find those, because often organizations hire those from in-house. They'll train, like Bill said, people in HR to fill those roles, as opposed to just hire someone completely from the outside for that. Do you find that, Bill?
Yeah, I do. And I wanted to add one or two additional comments to Ari's question. One is credibility. Look, for any profession, especially coaching, you want to make sure you're coming across as credible. I find as an external, this is true, not only for coaching, but true for most consultants, that when you're brought in from outside the company, often you have instant credibility. And when you're internal, even if you have a really good positive reputation internal to the company, so I've mentioned before, my experience has been you're wearing multiple hats. So you may not have as much credibility in just that one role as a coach as you would be if you're coming in external. The other, somewhat related to it, and maybe this is one of the benefits of experience, is that I've seen with more junior internal coaches, it's really hard for them to establish credibility, because often they're coaching people either at a different level within the organization, or someone who's older. As an external coach, often my experience has been you have instant credibility, and it's really for you to lose that credibility. If hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, good. Well, it's nice. We're kind of segueing into kind of external coaching pros and cons. So that's great. So we've got a couple other questions from our viewers. And remember, please ask any questions as we're talking. And if there are any coaches, internal or external, we'd love to hear your thoughts on kind of the pros and cons that you've experienced as an internal or external coach. If we have HR leaders here, what you experience. I also want to say hello to a couple new people. There's Karen Borland is here. Hi, Karen. Go Blue. Nice to see you. So I'm going to put this question up. So Shabina Ball. Hello, Shabina. Thank you for watching. She wrote, she's curious to know about sensitivity towards female leaders of color internally versus externally. So I'll start this one, Bill, and then you can kind of chime in. So that's really interesting. So couple things that come to me. Again, I'm primarily coming now from an external coaching standpoint, and I know when I work with organizations who are looking to coach, whether it's female leaders of color or any individual who well, really, actually. Let me just talk about female leaders of color, because I actually have some experience with this. I've had the HR sponsors. So as an external coach, there's usually someone in the organization who is sponsoring the coaching initiative. They would call me and say, hey, we're looking for a coach for this, female leader, or this team of women leaders of color that, we want to retain and develop. And we will have a conversation about finding the right coaches for those people. Again, whether they're male, female, of color, LGBT, BTQ. I have a team of coaches where we will talk very clearly with the HR sponsor. What are the needs of the leader that's being coached? And if it's important, I have a team of coaches, and I've been hired by organizations where my coaches of colors coached the client, not me, because I was a white woman and this person wanted a man of color or a woman of color to be the coach because that was an important need of that person. So as an external coach, when I am going into an organization, we usually have what's called fit conversations, and I encourage each person being coached to talk to two of our coach team, and they get to pick the coach that fits the best for them. And we will ask, are there any special identity issues that would be supportive of that are supportive to you or would make you, feel more comfortable? And we've gotten, yes, I'd like someone with the same identity as me, as well as we've gotten, I'd like someone with a different identity of me because I'm hoping to get, to learn or have a different perspective. So that's just kind of, I think as an external coach, I am always sensitive about making sure not just female leaders of color, but any person I'm coaching, that we are addressing kind of identity as well as, kind of psychological safety issues in the coach selection. So Shabina, I don't know if that answers the question. Bill, do you have more insight or experience or thoughts on that?
So I've had experience as an internal coach, and the way you addressed it, Julie, was very similar to my experience. Is the two women of color that I'm thinking about as an internal coach, this is where coaching is really do a lot of upfront work through 360 interviews, through surveys, through conversations with the coachee that you're coaching. What are some of their what are some of their goals for the coaching engagement? Look, you sometimes you do need to partner with other people, and I'm thinking of the one of the two women that I was coaching, that part of that coaching engagement also involved mentoring, and that's probably a whole different topic, Julie, right? The difference between mentoring and coaching. But it is common, regardless if it's women of color in this case or other development areas, that you do partner with other people, and mentoring might be an option. But it's a great question. But again, it's driven by the goals of the coachee, and if this is a goal of something that, in this case, a woman of color wants to work on, great. But it just might, it may or may not be part of the coaching engagement.
Got it. Great. Shabina, again, thanks for the great question. And again, if you have other comments, let us know. So we have another question from Leah Hyman. So I'm going to, so Leah's question is, when do you feel like you've acquired enough experience to call yourself a coach, and how do you navigate imposter syndrome while giving your advice? So do you want me to take this one, or you want to take this one?
You can both answer it once. You can start first, and I'll piggyback.
Okay. So first off, so being a coach is not about acquired experience. So what it is about, coaching is a skill. As Bill said earlier, it's a profession. I probably don't know the many hours, but when I first came to coaching, I probably had 400 hours of coach training within the first, year or two. And then, over the last 20 years, to sustain my International Coach Federation certification, I have to do, continuing education every year and, kind of reapply for certification. So the coach is not the expert on the field their coach that their leader or their coachee is in. So I've coached anywhere from librarians to astronauts to financial, vice presidents to CEOs to teachers to dancer. I mean, I've been fortunate to probably coach pretty much every profession, and from individual contributor to senior executive. I don't have to know their business. My expertise and experience is as the coach. So it's a process. And the belief in coaching is that the person being coached, we look at their experience. It actually has, my experience is as a coach and knowing my coaching skills. not as a professional in the field of the person I'm coaching. A distinction, though, that I think is worth making is there are times where a coach takes off their coaching hat and will share advice. So because my advice and my experience and expertise is in leadership development, human resources, career management, work-life balance, I will share advice around those issues when appropriate. But that's actually not necessarily part of the coaching process. So that's the first question. Bill, do you want to?
So I hate sports metaphors, but I'm going to use one in this situation. So, I think about, hitting a baseball. So if you're trying to hit a baseball, that's a skill. Coaching is a skill. So with hitting a baseball, if I read a book, a 200-page book about how to hit a baseball, and then I went out and tried to hit a baseball, I'd probably miss it for the first 100 times. Coaching is similar to that. Training's not enough. So training is the foundation. You need to get a lot of training, as Julie had alluded to. But then part of it is the experience. And statistics will show that the best way to learn is not necessarily only going to training. It's also the experience and getting real-time feedback. So coaching is a similar process, is that it starts with the training so that you understand, and part of that training is experiential training where you're getting feedback. But it's like any other skill. Once you get the training, once you have the practice, the more you do it, the better you're going to do if you're open to feedback and you have people that can provide that feedback to you.
Great. Well, and so I think that's a really important piece to talk about, is that, for those who are kind of considering coaching as a profession or thinking about it, whether internal or external, any kind of coach training program, this is kind of the mantra of like beginner coach training, is you become a coach by coaching. So literally after your first coach class, whether it's an hour or a weekend, your homework will be go coach someone. It'll be a friend for no fee, but you practice your coaching skills, and it's by having a conversation. But coaching isn't giving advice. So that's the second question, and then we're going to kind of move on. But Leah asked, how do you navigate imposter syndrome while giving advice? You're not giving advice. You are facilitating the person you are talking to, their expertise and their skills. Again, you may offer advice if you are an expert, but imposter syndrome doesn't come into coaching, or shouldn't come into coaching. It may, but it shouldn't come into coaching because you don't have to be someone. You have to be a good coach. So if you need to make sure you're building your coaching muscles, not your advice giving muscles. So Bill, do you want to add anything else to that before we move on?
So you had mentioned sometimes you take off your coaching hat. It is not uncommon where someone will ask, say, look, Bill, I know you've worked in HR for 20 plus years. How do I have a performance discussion with someone? Well, that's not really coaching. That's more in terms of that's really more training. How do you teach someone to have a performance discussion versus, Bill, when I'm in a meeting, I just feel like I'm not having the impact that I want to have with my team. That's more of a coaching opportunity to really explore what's going on, help the coachee gain more insight. And one of the principles of coaching is that the coachee really does know the answer. It's the coach's job to really listen at a deep level, ask the powerful questions to help the coachee find the answer for themselves.
Perfect. That's a lovely response. Okay, so let's reintroduce you. You were just hearing Bill Hyman answer a question about coaching. Bill's an executive coach and HR consultant, and I am Julie Cohen, CEO of Work Life Leader, also an executive coach. And we are talking about coaching, internal versus executive coaching, what HR and leaders need to know. So let's switch over to external coaching. I think we covered a lot of the pros and cons in general, but I want to make sure we haven't missed anything. If you are watching live, or even if you're watching recorded at a later date, it's Wednesday, October 14th in the afternoon on the East Coast. And we probably have another 10 minutes before we wrap up. So if you have any final questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. If you are a coach, either internal or external, we'd love to hear your take on this discussion. If you're an HR leader or a professional who has worked with a coach, we'd love to hear your experience, thoughts, comments, and questions. But Bill, so what have we missed of anything around the pros and cons of external coaching? And just what do you think?
Yeah, so I go back to Ari's question. Ari's question was basically asking a question, the difference between external and internal. And I'll tell you one thing that we have not mentioned, and this is my own personal experience. I find as an external coach, in a lot of ways, it's a lot more liberating because you're not working under the constraints of being an employee of that organization, and you have to worry about the political dynamics and perhaps what you say and worried about reaction. So as an external coach, and we've mentioned this before, Julie, is you really do have instant credibility. You just have to share, your background, your experiences coaching, and boom, they understand why you're coming. So credibility tends to be a lot more instantaneous as an external coach.
Interrupt you for that, just so people, because I think that's true, but I also want to clarify what you're saying.
Okay.
One of the reasons why you have instant credibility is because as an external coach, the organization who's brought you in, they've done all the vetting. It's not like you just get the credibility because, hey, you're an external coach. You get the credibility because the HR or organizational sponsor, they talked to 10 coaching companies or 10, they've hired you because they've done the vetting work. If they're doing their job right. So, being an external coach doesn't make you instantly credible. It's when you get into that organization, the organization has put a system in place to do that. So just to clarify, I agree with everything you're saying.
Well,
Go ahead, sorry.
You can disagree sometimes too, Julie. The other thing that I wanted to mention, and this cuts both ways, and it's a question that Janine had asked earlier about confidentiality. So on the plus side, as an external coach, I think the coachee recognizes, look, we understand confidentiality is going to be held sacred, and you talked about that in the first session. However, the con is sometimes the coachee, and they're right, the paying client is the organization. So the perception might be, look, when push comes to shove from the leader, from the coachee's perspective, are they really going to keep this information confidential? Now, Julie, you and I know as coaches, we are going to keep it confidential, but it's more the perception. I see that also as a potential con as an external coach, that will they share some information because they're going to go to the client who's paying them for that coaching engagement.
Right. And so, as an external coach, what I do that I'm always very clear about before I'm even hired, I have a very direct conversation with the organizational sponsor about what confidentiality needs to look like for me to feel comfortable working in that realm. And if there's any concern about that, we just need to be transparent of what's going to happen. So in some of my coaching work, we're very clear what happens between the coach and the client is 100% confidential, but you need to show up for your coaching sessions. So if you don't show up for your coaching sessions consistently, we have to let the organization know that they're paying for coaching, but you're not showing up. So, but that has to be clear that, that as a coach, we have to make sure you show up. And so even that to me has to be clearly delineated. So the leader or person being coached understands that their attendance matters because, the company is investing. So any kind of perceived conflict of interest or anything that might hedge confidentiality, you have to address it up front, because what's that phrase? It takes years to build trust. It takes a second to lose it. And that is 100% true. And so as a coach, that trusting relationship and that's built on confidentiality, if that goes, you're toast. So
Julie, just one last advantage I would say as an external coach, and this isn't only perception, this is factual information. As an external coach, you are going to be working with a lot more companies, working with a lot of leaders in many different industries, and I think that does help as an external coach that you can draw upon that experience in a coaching relationship. Plus, when you're internal, you are so busy, it's really hard to keep current on different industries, keep current in the coaching profession. As an external coach, you do tend to make that much more a priority to really read up and make sure as an external coach that you are understanding the current coaching issues, as well as, industry and business.
Yeah. We have one, this is going to be our last question. We just got a great question. And it's from Arye.
Again, I thought there was only one question per viewer.
Well, we're in a generous mood. We'll take multiple. So as a coach, how do you evaluate the effectiveness of coaching? Is there a difference between external and internal coaching in terms of evaluation? Do you want to start that, Bill? Or me, your call.
No, I can, and then you can piggyback on my comments.
Okay, great.
So again, great question. And I will say, Ari, that's one of the challenges and opportunities of coaching. So in a coaching engagement, you do want to set up front, and I'm not suggesting the first session, but early on, if you're conducting 360 interviews, if you're doing an online 360, or collecting feedback about that individual, at some point early on in the engagement, you do want to have coaching goals. That the leader comes up, these are the goals that I want to be working on during the period of engagement. But part of it is not only here's my goals that I want to work on, goes exactly to the heart of your question, RA. What's going to be the criteria? What's going to be the measurement of success to be able to evaluate, have you made progress against those goals? Now, depending upon the goal, some are easier than others. Some are difficult. Some are qualitative. But again, it's important upfront that to the best of the leader, the coachee, and the coach's ability in facilitating the conversation, that you do come up with some sort of measurement of success and progress.
Yes. So do you think, Bill, there's a difference between internal and external in terms of evaluation?
Not from my experience, no. The process is pretty similar.
So I'm going to take the question in a little different angle. So again, the actual coaching relationship one-on-one, Bill describes great ways to evaluate it. And I also think, though, there's this broader need for evaluation from the profession of how is the coaching engagement. So there's the individual evaluation, that leader, that coachee, that person being coached, are they getting what they want and need from the engagement? Then there's the level of how is that engagement impacting the organization and the benefit to the organization. And so it's interesting, as someone who owns a coaching company that has a team of coaches, and we go in and do some large scale organizations. I know, and I'm 100% confident because of who my coaches are and the power of coaching, that usually 99% of every coaching engagement, the coachee, the person being coached, it is life-changing and invaluable. The challenge sometimes is how does that turn into the value for the organization? So often there's increased retention, there's increased engagement, increased productivity, all the skills that are, that we want to see of our professionals develop. And sometimes it is very hard to quantify the return on investment. And this is actually something that it was probably about 2 years ago, I started looking at how do we show a financial value and financial benefit of coaching. And there was very little information out there and data on this. And there was an ICF study that I found like tons.
Hey, Julie.
Yes.
Not everyone will know what ICF stands for.
Sorry. Thank you. Good call. International Coach Federation. So that's the professional association of professional coaches globally. So the ICF, there was research done, but it was 20 years old. I still had it quoted on one of my websites, and I found it quoted on so many other people's websites. And it talked about the ROI of coaching of some great number, which was super. but it was 20 years old. And then I was trying to find this kind of data elsewhere, and it was I didn't find it. And so fortunately, one of my current clients was open to doing an ROI study on one of our engagements, and we actually just completed it. We're still in the process of finalizing the report. But Arya, I don't know if you were talking more about that individual or that organizational effectiveness. I do think there is a dearth of data on kind of that return on investment, because external coaching and internal coaching is a significant investment, which we're going to wrap up soon. We didn't even get to that piece of kind of the differences between internal and external in terms of kind of investment, which is another conversation we could have in the future. But so I do think there is room for further. There's further opportunity in assessing effectiveness, both on the individual standpoint and the organizational standpoint, both for internal and external. So I think, thank you. It's a great question. So it's out there, but there's definitely a need. Let me see. So Arya, you're going to be our final statement. He wrote, how to determine ROI is a question I would ask the corporation before initiating the engagement. Yes. And a lot of times the catalyst for why someone comes to coaching is not necessarily a financial ROI. It's a very different ROI. It's, this is a leader we want to retain and develop. This is a leader that's great that needs some polishing. This is, there's a lot of different reasons. It isn't always financial, but there is what my statement was, that there is limited financial return on investment data out there right now in the field, which I think is some area where we can do that. Yeah, always, to me, it's critical. What are the results you want for this engagement, and how do we quantify that? Always agree with you, Arya, that needs to be in the conversation.
Julie, you can tell Arya's an external coach, so he's asking all the questions that an external coach should be asking.
That's great. So, Bill, as we wrap up, any final thoughts on our topic today? And after you give your final thoughts, tell people how they can reach you.
Okay, sure. So, the one theme, and it's going to seem incredibly obvious, but cannot stress enough, especially for internal coaches, is credibility. So one of the things that worries me, Julie, and to our listening audience, is sometimes people do not fully understand and fully appreciate the coaching profession. And that coaching, for people who don't really understand, it's all about listening and kind of like Leah asked the question before, giving advice, and anyone can do that. So it does worry me about internal coaches that I've seen where someone who might be a really strong performer in HR, person says, well, we need coaching, and now tomorrow you're going to be a coach. So credibility, training, experience is very important, and coaching is a profession that you need to have the discipline to make sure that you're qualified to do it. So for those who would like to contact me, there's really 3 ways. One is by email, and that would be, this is going to be a mouthful, Julie, wahrconsultingservices.com. That's a long one, huh?
Yeah. Just find them on LinkedIn.
And my website's the same. So it's wahrconsultingservices.com. And let me give you my cell number, 215-280-8230. So look forward to hearing from everyone.
Yes, so text Bill and say hello. Well, I want to thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk coaching, leadership, and all things. So it's great to talk with you. Before we say goodbye, I want to share what our upcoming topics are in the pipeline. I don't have dates yet, but they'll be hopefully in the next couple of weeks. One of our topics is going to be called Bots, HR, and Coaching. We're going to be looking at artificial intelligence and how that's affecting HR and coaching. And then another one is going to be about neuroscience, coaching, and leadership. So we're going to be looking at the brain and how that affects leadership, and how we use our brain to become more effective leaders. Would love to hear if there's topics that you want to hear. Put them in the comments. Any topics around career, leadership, work-life balance, professional effectiveness. We love talking about it. So we'd love to hear from you. So with that, thank you, everybody. We hope to see you again, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Yay, bye.